We'll start our regular show in just a moment, but following the Battle of Wolf 359 last week, there's some bad news. James?
Well, it is with great sadness that I must report the loss of Chief Engineer Michael Argyle, who died serving aboard the USS Excalibur in the Battle of Wolf 359. We will always remember his wit, his guile, his bravery, and most importantly, we will never forget his letter-writing campaign. He will always be in our hearts.
That was really beautiful. You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Bonjour et bienvenue à Premier Contact. Je m'appelle Andrew.
Je m'appelle James.
And je suis très facile.
Sorry, that's completely wrong. What it should be is, hello, welcome to First Contact, live from France tonight. As at some point, I feel England must have won a war against the French. But anyway, more on that later. This week we have been watching Family. It first aired the week of October 1st, 1990. It was written by Ronald D. Moore and directed by Les Landau. James, what happens in this one?
Following his trauma with the Borg, Picard visits his home village of Barre in France for the first time in 20 years to reconcile with his brother Robert and meet his sister-in-law and nephew for the first time. Meanwhile on the Enterprise, Worf's human parents visit the ship, while Wesley gets an unexpected message from the past.
Well, a short and sweet synopsis for a fairly simple episode. Alex, you'd never seen it before, so what did you make of this one?
Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, clearly no one involved has ever visited France, but yeah, it's pretty good aside from that.
It's France in the 24th century. It's completely different.
No, this village has not changed in hundreds of years. It is the same.
Ever since it was uprooted and plonked into California.
The vineyard, that's what the French do. They've got a vineyard and they drink wine. This is what I know about France. And they have English accents. All from different regions, apparently, but they have English accents.
Yes, all very stagey, aren't they? One day, nephew, I'm going to grow up and then you'll be proud of me. Ah, will you become a starship captain? No, I'll go to RADA.
He should be so lucky. So, it's a very different kind of episode. In fact, it's the only episode of Star Trek not to feature a bridge shot up to this point. Although the Enterprise does feature fairly heavily at points, there's none of that exploring space or going to a planet. This is a character study. There's no science fiction plot even, which was controversial at the time, but I think it's definitely an episode that benefits from that, actually giving characters time to be human. Or Klingon.
That's the whole point. After Best of Both Worlds, you needed to slow down, and even though it is a sci-fi show, it is fantasy, it has an element of realism in the human relationships. So you need to bring it back a little bit after throwing the characters into this unbelievable situation against cyborgs.
Well, and the absence of the sci-fi setting and all of those plot tropes is entirely necessary for the plot that they're dealing with here. The clashing of mindsets sort of requires it in a way for the setup they have.
And as we've said, Star Trek supposedly doesn't have character conflict, or Gene Roddenberry said that there is no such thing in the future and our characters should get along, humans. But here, you just strip it down to the most basic. Feuding brothers. And that makes absolute sense, because obviously having Picard visit his home, a very forward-thinking man in many ways, an exceptional man, And it's that classic sitcom thing. You go home and nothing's actually changed. And what's it like when you think you've moved on to go back into that setting? Are you the same person you were when you left? And that plays in really nicely with the sort of post-traumatic stress aspect as well. You go back to find out if you are the same person that you were before. And I think that opening sequence with Troy, that works quite nicely. She is being a counsellor. She's being...
annoying.
Well, kind of annoying. Say, playful, is that appropriate in this situation? But it sets up the episode appropriately, I would say, with her basically setting up the plot.
I mean, it is the way that you would sort of lazy write a psychologist in a TV show, isn't it? Oh, you've picked the apple. Interesting. Well, should I not pick the apple? Should I pick the orange? You'd rather have the orange. Interesting. Are you ever going to tell us why? Are you ever going to offer some psychological analysis? No, because that would be interesting.
I think the scene with Troy does at least serve to make the episode feel a little bit more standalone in the way that for some reason they felt necessary for Next Generation. They needed each episode to act on its own, except, of course, Best of Both Worlds. So even though this is kind of the unofficial third part, it does, because of their explanation in the opening, work on its own.
Yeah, I think I was surprised in some respect how few connections there are to it. I mean, there obviously are some at the start and at the end, but you'd kind of expect them to be a bit more throughout the episode. But no, they have consciously tried to make it stand apart.
And I think that's to the episode's strengths. And it makes it better that you've got a character who kind of wants to forget everything that's happened to him. So of course he's not going to go around mentioning what has happened. There are other characters who bring it up to him, talks of a parade. But Picard doesn't want to know any of that. He just wants to rekindle his connections with his past. He doesn't want to think about his present, really. And that means it serves very well as a continuation to Best of Both Worlds, but without feeling unnecessarily tied to it.
Is he trying to rekindle it, though, or is he trying to sort of maybe also remind himself why he left?
Well, this is better psychology than we got from Troy.
Well, these are the questions that they kind of ask in the episode, because he considers leaving Starfleet to stay here. So is he going back to find an alternative, or is he going back to realise why he left?
I realise that this means jumping around the plot a little bit, but just in case we skip over it later, I would like to address that job that he nearly takes up, because that's insane. They want to raise up the seabed to create another continent.
Well, I guess when you've got no war for resources and no need for money and you're living in peaceful harmony, humanity just has to find some way to absolutely screw up their planet. Everyone's bored, aren't they?
And there's overpopulation, and house prices are bad enough in London as it is. We need more space.
France is full of Yorkshiremen.
What they've actually done, though, is humanity has colonised the galaxy. There are planets everywhere filled with humans, and there is the option to explore wherever you want to go. You can go to a planet of scientists, or a planet of Irish people, or a planet of terrorists if you really want to. There's cowboy planets out there as well.
Racist planets.
Exactly. So
there's a gangster planet. Don't forget the gangster planet.
Never forget the gangster planet. So why on earth do you need to sort of build an extension onto Earth?
Well, everyone likes conservatory. Except in France, a conservatoire is a music academy.
It's true. Actually, we've got one of those in Glasgow. I mean, it used to be the Academy of Music and Drama, but now it's the Conservatoire because they're pretentious.
And you've got to remember that every single Federation colony ends up getting into trouble with some aliens or something goes wrong and an asteroid is about to hit it, and they only get saved at the very last minute by the Enterprise.
That crystalline entity, it's got no respect for colonies, does it?
See, that's why they've got to stay on Earth. They're safe on Earth unless an alien race from the future goes back in time and manipulates an alien race to build a super weapon to attack Earth. Then the people on Earth are fine.
That old cliche.
Or if they happen to be sitting in a barn that catches on fire.
Oh. Well, you know, sometimes they finally got that replicator fitted and then it went on fire. So it's actually quite interesting. The Enterprise has been back to Earth during the run of this show, but he has never visited home. It said Marie sends him letters and keeps him up to date with his family, but Picard hasn't had enough curiosity to go and meet his nephew.
That he calls his uncle.
That's a what a lovely joke that
why?
is.
Is it a thing? Did I miss something? Is what I think I'm asking here.
Renee got it wrong right at the start. He got confused, and then they played that up throughout the episode because he's a charming moppet. But do you think that says something about Picard, or sort of just what the script said for this particular episode to work?
Well, he does hate children.
Well, that's true.
Well, he seems to get along with this one mostly okay. They only have one sort of crossword. You know, you don't seem so arrogant. Yeah, arrogant. You don't seem that way to me. What does that mean anyway? Arrogant son of well, let's talk about that later, shall we? Yeah, my dad, he also said you were a mother for... well, let's just leave that. A complete well, I think he's a prick. I mean a prick. You know what I mean.
The core of the episode is a relationship between Jean-Luc and Robert. How very French they are.
Yeah, they call him Robert, but they don't call Louis, do they? It's either Robert and Louis or Robert and Louis. Make your bloody mind up.
They call him Louis in one scene. So that was good continuity. But I think wonderfully played, that first scene where he goes and meets him and they are as distant as they've perhaps ever been. It just tells you everything you need to know about that relationship. It just sets it up perfectly. Although we're not having any kind of alien conflict, there's conflict at the core. Conflict is important. Conflict is drama. And you have someone with a long homecoming and basically unwelcomed, unwanted, and just made to feel small and made to feel human. And that's nice.
No, it's the future. People don't have conflict in the future. Gene Roddenberry says this is the perfect future and we can't have conflict. It must not be allowed.
It's this unresolved childhood trauma, essentially. And I think it's interesting that Picard is set up here as the hero of the town. He was the best at school, at sport and academically, and then he's got this resentful brother who can't quite handle that, but also doesn't understand why you would ever want to leave this world. It's two characters with completely different philosophies on life, and I'm not sure you ever get that as the older man, that Picard was this outstanding player, this arrogant, almost a jock, you would say, if you were making it an American high school. He was the prom king, but of course we don't want to make American comparisons. He was the head boy.
I was top prefect.
Exactly. And to be honest, I'm not sure how much you can say about any of that. It's very well played, and it ends in a fist fight where they get all muddy, and I think that from Patrick Stewart, again, just showing his strengths as an actor, getting out all the trauma, and sort of having family to kind of undercut it. I think that works because they remind you who you are and aren't afraid to stop you taking yourself too seriously and reminding you who you really are.
Which mostly seems to be a prick from the way his brother talks about him even after they've reconciled.
Well, I think they're both kind of
pricks.
Yeah, they're not the most savoury in their particular settings. I think it seems Picard is a great captain. He is a great winemaker and husband and father. But together, they're just like cheese and another kind of cheese that doesn't go very well with wine. They're like Brie and Monterey Jack. Mm.
Ugh. Ugh.
I guess the whole plot with the him being tempted by the Atlantis job is just to ask, is there another life? Is there something from the Enterprise? It's playing into that conflict. What will Picard do next? Can he actually go back? And there's never any question, but it's intriguing enough, I suppose, that there could be something on Earth that is as interesting.
Well, let's be honest, it's the best time that you can do it. Coming off the back of the story that they are coming off the back of, it's one of the only times where you're really going to get the audience to truly question whether he would stay or not. Even though we as the audience realise that in a long-running series, clearly they're not going to write him out at this point in this manner. But, you know, it's more plausible here than it would be elsewhere. And maybe in some respects by not mentioning the events of the previous episode until so late on, you're kind of playing into the strengths of that a bit.
And it's interesting that we've now had 3 episodes in a row dealing with career choices. We've had 2 episodes of Riker basically being forced into a position where he has to consider the direction his career is going and whether what he's currently doing is right for him. And now we have Picard doing exactly the same thing. He's considering whether his life is currently going in the right direction or whether there is something else out there.
So if anyone needs any careers advice, we recommend watching Star Trek The Next Generation.
I think that these are probably in a row the best 3-parter certainly Star Trek has ever done. But if you explained it to somebody as, this 3-parter, it's about career choices. It's, Riker and Picard, they have to consider their careers. Wouldn't sell it that well, would it?
Not really.
I'm wondering if they can do an exciting 3-parter about them doing their accounts. Something equally boring.
There's no accounts because there's no money in the future, except when there is.
Number 1, I have to discuss a serious matter with you. We're £7 short on the petty cash. And I think Mr. Worf's been embezzling the funds. Want some headshine?
That would be very dishonourable of him if he did that.
It's all the front. It's all to lead you in so that once a month you can just fiddle the petty cash, take a couple of quid out.
Klingons do not steal from petty cash.
I want that on a t-shirt.
Well, since we've mentioned Worf, let's deal with the B-plot. Then, Worf's human parents come on board, and Worf isn't keen. I like this a lot.
Is it because they have decided to make the most on-the-nose reference to where the idea of the Klingons comes from originally, by making his parents Russian?
Well,
I don't want to meet them. I don't want to confront the very obvious allegory that they were going for in the original series.
well, I mean, it's not like the undiscovered country wasn't about to do something quite similar.
Yeah. When was that in relation to this?
It was after this. It was after this because Gene Roddenberry died just before it came out.
I think it's filming during this, basically. But anyway, yeah, it's an on-the-nose reference, and it's one of those things. When Worf was first there, you didn't really have any appreciation how different he was from other Klingons. That he'd had this completely different upbringing, and he like Spock was a child of two worlds. It's just, there's a Klingon on the bridge, that makes sense, there's peace, but he's the only Klingon in Starfleet because, for very specific reasons, he wasn't just a Klingon that decided to sign up. He was raised by humans on Earth, Russian humans, although he doesn't have a trace of an accent. It's amazing.
Klingons do not have accents.
To me, this deals with Worf's dishonour in a far more interesting way than the episode which was all about that, which none of us liked.
Well, because the minute they get into the heavy honour stuff, it's really bloody tedious most of the time. Dealing with it through his embarrassment is a far better way to go. It's more relatable.
His parents literally say, "We don't understand all the details." And I was like, well, yeah, exactly. He's talking for the audience. Strangely enough, in an episode written by the same person.
I have to say, I don't remember the details. I couldn't even remember him having been dishonoured.
But they just go, well, Worf, it doesn't matter because we still love you, and we'll have a sort of almost hug moment. And I think that all works. It's addressing stuff as well. This whole thing about the next generation not being serialized. Well, it's not. But they don't forget stuff about the characters. They do come back to things. So I think that's also nice. It's showing where Star Trek could potentially go with serialized storytelling that doesn't have to involve some weird twist at the end of every episode, and it's revealed that everyone in Starfleet's stupid and doesn't know how to fight a war, they're from a mirror universe, or they just make terrible decisions and they've got a drive that can jump around and they don't use it ever again and the uniforms don't look right. Stupid show.
And this is why we don't do a podcast about Star Trek Discovery.
Worf's parents, I think, they're given sort of slight cliched parent kind of touches. You've got the Starfleet dad, who...
I've got all the schematics.
That's nice. It's nice character stuff. It's a nice performance. And his mum, who's like a mum. She makes pie. And they've got that nice scene with Guinan, and it's just sort of reassuring them. And it's almost strange to have that point of view, because we're worried about the point of view of our guest characters. How do they see someone else? How do they see one of our characters? And that's always good, because it gives you a different perspective, I guess.
Why did you never give him prune juice? He never asked. Well, he said he never had the stuff before he came here. Now he can't get enough of it. He's never been constipated again. In some ways, we're sort of discussing the broad strokes of the episode, but I think that's par the course for this particular edition, because so much of it deals with the character nuances that, in some ways, we don't have the same sort of discussion points that we normally would. The whole Picard plot isn't so much a series of instances, sort of little incremental steps of him not getting on with his brother or being pushed further towards the job. And it's the same with Worf, just the incremental embarrassment of his parents first coming aboard and then hanging around with Geordie. The first time anyone's ever wanted to do that. And then that just sort of continues until the plot culminates for Worf, which is in that scene where he admits, I've been dishonoured, and they go, yeah, we know, let's all have a hug. And then that sort of ends.
And then there's the C plot, which I feel is interesting. It fits into all the thematic stuff of the episode. I feel it's slightly inelegantly inserted here.
I see the reason to have it. If you're trying to have an episode all about family relationships, yeah, clearly you've got the only mother and son there seems to be on the ship. That makes sense to explore that, and you've got a dead dad, so let's have a look at the dead dad. The problem is, not bringing out his corpse, obviously, that would be untasteful. But the problem is, it's not really set up, because you're having to dedicate so much time to the A and B plots that the C plot is really just, here's a case full of stuff. Oh, here's a message I'd completely forgotten to ever give Wesley. And then the next time you get it, it's, here's the message. Great. Well, you're not really set up that Wesley has come to terms with his dad's death, or he's sad about his dad's death. We assume that to be the case because we're not monsters, but we just have to take Dr. Crusher's word for it, and it's not really set up properly. I think that's the big problem.
It is. That scene where she just gets the delivery of this box and pulls out the uniform. Oh, this is the uniform he died in. It just feels so strange. It would be different if it was, I'm bringing lots of stuff out of storage. But it is just this one box of his stuff. Or if it had just been bequeathed to Wesley on his 18th birthday and it was delivered to him out of the blue. It might make more sense, but it does just feel like they've got this scene where it's, oh, I'd forgotten about this. And it's just very... It's just very inelegant. I think it feels very unnatural as well. And it's all very much exposition until that scene. And the actual scene as it plays out would be nice in another episode. I think you're absolutely right. You don't get the setup, but you do get the payoff. And Wesley doesn't feature in the episode at all until he's forced to confront a hologram of his father, giving him wisdom and advice. And that's really interesting. And I feel there's a really nice scene in there, and there's probably a really nice character piece in there. But you don't get to play any of that.
Well, perhaps the obvious answer is that the B plot and the C plot should have interlinks at some point. That you have Worf, annoyed with his parents, goes off and ends up talking to Wesley. My parents are so embarrassing. My father just wants to talk about schematics. And then Wesley, well, at least you've got it. I never knew my dad. My dad's dead. Did I tell you? Yes, you told us.
And then Worf would go, my real parents are dead as well. These are my adoptive parents.
But, it's cliched, but that would actually be setting up, that it's even something that just Wesley has mentioned before his mother turns around and goes, here's your dead dad.
Yeah, does Wesley basically have a line until that particular scene where she's just going, well, here's a hollow slug. Go and talk to your dad. Oh, okay.
And then even then he's just sort of stands very impassively watching it until the very end of Dad, oh no, he's gone. Isn't it always the way?
With the A plot and the B plot working so well, and I think anything you could add to the A and B plot wouldn't improve it, because you could say that it's such a short amount of the episode that Wesley's plot takes up. You could cut it out the episode, but I think that the A and B plots are perfect the way they are. It would be to the detriment of the episode to take the C plot out and, you know, replace it with something else. I think they needed to fill it with something, and to have this thematic link, it works. You know, it's not like they could have done anything with Data. You know, because obviously he's a robot, he doesn't have a father.
No, I agree. I do think it works, but I just think it's a little underwritten. Even the scene itself, which is nice and it's genuine, but I think I would have liked Wesley's father to have said something a little more on the nose. Maybe just something that you can take away from that, because it's basically just, I'm a father now. I don't know what I'm doing, but I look forward to getting to know you. Thanks. There's not a lot of depth to it.
I think from a screenwriting point of view, it is odd that it's built up and this message is imparted to Wesley, but the content of the message has no dramatic effect upon Wesley. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example of a similar thing in another film. It's an inelegant example, but Iron Man 2 is all I can think of. But
no, I don't think that is an elegant example. That's a great example.
But a message from your dead dad that advances either the plot or has the character have some sort of revelation about themselves. Wesley goes in and his dad's dead, and he's a bit sad about that. And he comes out and his dad's dead, and he's seen what his dad looked like.
I think the example that you're probably trying to think of is Red Dwarf, The Beginning.
That would have been better.
Yeah, it doesn't have any dramatic impetus, and that's the problem with it. I mean, as a scene, it's nice. As a setup, it makes sense. But all in all, it's a little disappointing. But I can't really complain, because I think this episode is nice, and it deals with its characters, and it deals with characters that need to be dealt with. But yeah, I think Wesley deserved a little bit more screen time. But I suspect the producers were not happy with him at this point.
His cocaine habit was getting massively out of hand.
We just like to state, though, Will Wheaton did not have a cocaine habit, and we are making these points for comedic purposes.
So what you were actually asking when you said before, has Will Wheaton even had a line at this point?
Quite. And so everyone at the end is back on the Enterprise, having learned something about themselves and ready to start anew with more adventures, exploring space and encountering new civilizations. Do you think this will have had much of an impact on everyone?
No.
No.
The whole point of the episode is to take this massive event and bring people back to their norm. They didn't want the characters to just be an elastic band and just click back into place. They needed this episode. And I think this is why this story in particular, I think, is so special, and why I think television as a medium can be a lot better than film. I think it has a lot more potential because, you know, I've been watching a few Marvel films recently. They don't have time to do this there. They, with their TV shows, they do, and oftentimes they spend too long doing it in their TV shows. But with a big film, you have gigantic explosions, and it's very much like the best of both worlds. But you don't have this episode that comes after it. You don't see what happens after it. That just all happens off screen. And I think television needs to do this more. And unfortunately, they don't. This is the perfect example for television writers on how you come back from your big story which changes characters in ways which it doesn't seem like they could revert back from.
So essentially what you're saying is, this is Iron Man 3.
Iron Man 3 was a lot of explosions. It was a big action adventure.
The film that this makes me think of, bizarrely, at the end is The Last Jedi, because it's got that very similar ending of the boy looking up at the stars and dreaming of all of his potential, and let him dream of burning to death.
I absolutely had that exact same reaction. I was just like, oh, that's there. It works in this episode, unlike when they had it in Star Wars.
Oh, I didn't mind it in Star Wars, bizarrely.
So I think we've kind of tied that up. There's hope for the future. There's a fresh beginning, just like here. But we're going to pick over some of the less fine details in quickfire.
Quickfire.
So you may have noticed this week that there was no action, there was no jeopardy, and there was a person who didn't like that. And that person was Gene Roddenberry. As Ronald D. Moore stated in an interview to TrekCore, that he had a meeting with Rick Berman, Michael Piller, and they go into Gene's office, and Gene says that it says terrible things about Picard's parents, that these brothers don't exist in the 24th century because they have personal animosities. It would never happen. He doesn't buy any of it. It's not a Star Trek episode. There's no action, there's no jeopardy, they can't do that show. And he's absolutely right. It's not a Star Trek episode. It's a Star Trek The Next Generation episode, which is far better. And thankfully, Star Trek The Next Generation, for the most part, eventually ignored everything Gene Roddenberry said.
I think it's telling at this stage that Gene Roddenberry said these things, and everyone went, yep, what are you going to do about it? Essentially. And they made the episode they wanted to make. And I think Rick Berman was still fighting that sort of corner. I think he was still insisting on getting sci-fi plots in. But I think Michael Piller was quite strong and stood up against that. There's certain episodes of Voyager which could always have benefited from not having sci-fi plots in, but they tend to always. And I think there's possibly episodes of Next Generation later on that would, but it seems to be a rule that they will keep in at least a bit of sci-fi. This is the exception, but I don't think they ever moved past it. Especially, I don't think this was a watershed moment where we said, "Hey, maybe we can just ditch the sci-fi plot," because actually, you do end up having it at times when you think, maybe you shouldn't have the sci-fi plot, but. You know, it works for the show. It works as an exception, but yeah, I think this is a great episode of Star Trek. So it doesn't need those elements to function as a show.
Well, the counterpoint to that, of course, is the Voyager did do 2 episodes which didn't have sci-fi elements, or didn't really have sci-fi elements, and they are 2 of the worst episodes of Star Trek ever made. Fairhaven and 1159.
The holodeck characters getting self-aware, that's sci-fi.
No, Fairhaven is the one before that, which sets up all the characters, and they don't become self-aware. They're just... everybody's just in this holodeck program for some reason.
God, it's so bad.
Did you realise that this is the first time that Colmeany's character is given a full name? He's been in the show for 2 seasons.
He's been in the show for 4 seasons. He was in the first episode, wasn't he?
He was.
Was he?
Yeah. He's the con officer in the first one.
Christ, I didn't even remember that. It seems so long ago.
And he's basically now been promoted to season regular.
But very recurring, I think we would call him. He's also given a rank of Chief Petty Officer.
He deals with the petty cash.
So he is apparently not actually an officer, although he is wearing lieutenant's pins in this episode. This will be fixed later on, and then slightly blurred even later on. Anyway.
Speaking of petty, let's have a stop in at the Nitpicker's Guide. Not often worth it, but it just takes a bit of a strange detour again. For their plot oversights, there is only one listed for this episode, in which Phil Farrand asks, does it strike anyone else as odd that everyone in France speaks with an English accent during this episode? Yes, Phil. But he goes on, he gets a bit anecdotal, stating that one summer, my wife and I took an introduction to French course. At one point, our teacher told us of the French aversion to English words that are filtering into, and some would say polluting, their language. Ever the smart Alec, you don't say. I popped off with the comment that we should all just wait 100 years and then we could just go over to France and speak English. According to this episode, I was right. And according to your teacher, you're a dick.
Classic Farrand. It's the Wonder Woman effect, isn't it? So, because you've got this Englishman, you've got Patrick Stewart playing a Frenchman, every other French person in the show has to speak like that. And it's the same with Gal Gadot. You had all the Amazonians and Wonder Woman, and they all spoke with her accent. I like that. You know, that's fine. It's details. Just at least be consistent. And it is. So good.
That's why Worf's parents speak just like him.
This is the only episode in which Brent Spiner doesn't make an appearance. Didn't even notice.
Did they double bank?
Don't know what he gets up to in his trailer.
This was this was filmed after the next episode, and I imagine he probably needed a rest after the episode filmed before this.
Big lunch.
The Starfleet uniforms from yesterday's Enterprise make an appearance again. Sort of a version of the movie era uniforms, but with the TNG com badge. See, keeping the uniforms the same. Imagine if you set a show during the original series era and had completely different uniforms. Do you think that would bother people?
So, conditional to Behrman's acceptance of this particular storyline, he wanted a sci-fi plot to be added. Various plots were tried, but rejected, including one with a child stowaway, and another in which a wormhole caused crew members to disappear. I wouldn't ever criticise the B or the C plot if you consider what could have possibly polluted this episode.
When you're doing a small character piece, and the stakes are not big here, the stakes are essentially, do I take a job? But it's important for our characters because we're invested in these characters and what they do with their lives. If you have that kind of plot, you're wondering what's going on with that plot because it's bigger. It becomes bigger than the character stuff. So in order for the A plot to be character based, you can't have a B plot that's almost too distracting, that's too big, that the stakes are raised too much.
Tying back to this episode, a Chateau Picard wine label was created for the wedding scene in Star Trek Nemesis. Oh, God. It's good that they put so much thought and effort into that film instead of just lazily tossing it off and just, giving in to actors' demands in a way that just pushed the whole franchise over a cliff edge for many years.
Well, at least something survived the fire.
You know when I enjoy drinking wine like this? When I'm riding in a June buggy.
Can we talk about Worf's chair?
Yeah, yes. I mistook it as a piece of installation art that he just poses on top of to pounce at people entering his room.
I don't understand. What, it's like a sort of elevated barber chair with a mirror attached to it. What's going on with that?
Klingons abhor comfort.
It's just really odd. It's like if somebody said dress a set and make it look futuristic, and they went, Right. Well, people won't want chairs, will they? Although he's got a nice sofa in the other room, so...
Please, sit. Okay, son, we'll sit. No, not on the sofa. That's my good sofa. Sit on the weird piece of shit in the corner. Here's a stepladder.
Anyway, do you want to know a fact about the chair?
No. Yes.
No, it's too late now.
I really want to know about the chair.
The chair in Worf's quarters was also seen in Peak Performance, Reunion, Redemption, New Ground, Cost of Living, A Fistful of Datas, Birthright Part 1, Parallels, Genesis, and Firstborn, and was previously used as a command chair aboard the Tyrellian starship in the first season episode Haven. It was designed by Peter Ofsvik. Good job, Peter.
So, since this was seen in a previous episode, can we assume that everybody on board that ship was killed and they stolen this chair?
That is exactly what happened.
We never see the really interesting adventures.
Well, that was another episode of Star Trek Next Generation. Thank you very much for listening. We will be back again soon when we will be talking about brothers, which is another family-themed thing. But for now, goodbye.
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 And what's the source of that? What madness would inspire an expanded story of Chief Engineer Argyle?
It is the Next Generation novel Vendetta, which, for some reason, felt that Chief Engineer Argyle needed that little bit extra. Of course, that's not the only thing that happens to Chief Engineer Argyle. There is alternative timelines, one in which he's a female chief engineer on the Enterprise D, who was infamous for never wanting to take a physical, but was convinced by Nurse Geordie LaForge.
Nurse.
There was another alternative timeline where Argyle continued as chief engineer of the Enterprise and was killed during a raid on Earth after the Borg had taken over Earth. And that's in the Next Generation comic, The Worst of Both Worlds. There is also an alternative reality in which he gets decapitated by the Klingons. So, Argyle gets around.